I shouldn't be telling you this. God, I really shouldn't. Every fiber of my being, every screaming nerve ending, every tremor that runs through me when I remember, it tells me to keep my mouth shut, to just disappear like so many others who stumbled into the wrong places. But I can't. Not anymore. Because I made a mistake. A big one. The biggest. And if even one of you out there watching this, listening to my voice crack, is even thinking about doing what I did, about walking into one of those forgotten places, you need to know. You need to understand the rules. Because if you don't, you won't just get lost. You'll be taken. And what happens then? I've seen enough to know it's worse than anything you can imagine. Infinitely, agonizingly worse. My name is Alex, or what's left of it. The person I was, she died out there, left behind in the dust and the silence, replaced by this hollowed-out thing that just exists, filled with an echoing dread that never quite fades. I used to be an urban explorer, an enthusiast of the forgotten, not for fame, not for some morbid thrill. God, no. I hated the ghost hunter types, the ones who went in with their stupid cameras and staged screams, desecrating the quietude with their performative fear. For me, it was always about the silence, the profound, raw, unfiltered quiet of places where time had stopped, where human echoes had faded to nothing but faint memories in the air. Old hospitals, crumbling factories, abandoned amusement parks. I'd spent years documenting them, feeling the past hum beneath my fingertips, a gentle, melancholic pulse. Each brick, each rusting girder, each peeling paint chip told a story without words. They were beautiful, in their own tragic, decaying way. But then, I found the towns. Not just a house or a complex of buildings, but entire settlements, left to rot, seemingly untouched by the usual vandalism. And that's when everything changed. That's when the silence stopped being a comfort and started being a predator, an active, watchful entity. The first one was called Oak Haven, just a smudge on an old, forgotten map nestled so deep in a nameless valley that the mobile signal died a slow, agonizing death miles before I even saw the faded, splintered welcome sign. The kind of place you only found if you were looking for it, with a desperation bordering on obsession, or if it somehow wanted to be found, drawing you in like a fly to a forgotten spider web. I remember the drive in, the road narrowing from cracked asphalt to a gravel track choked with weeds, ancient twisted trees pressing in on either side like watchful skeletal sentinels, their bare branches clawing at the perpetually overcast sky. The air itself grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something indescribably old, like dust mixed with forgotten grief and the faint, metallic tang of dried blood. My gut twisted, a knot of visceral unease tightening with every mile. The hairs on my arms stood on end, an instinctual alarm blaring in my primitive brain, but my foot stayed on the gas, the allure. It was a siren song, promising secrets, a whisper of the truly unknown, and I was too foolish to resist. My camera, clutched tight in my hand, felt like a lifeline and a damnation all at once. Oak Haven wasn't like the other places I'd explored. It wasn't scarred by vandalism, no crude graffiti marring the walls, no smashed windows. Just an eerie, pristine decay, as if a powerful, invisible hand had simply lifted its inhabitants away, leaving everything behind. Cars still in driveways, rusted but untouched, some with keys still dangling from the ignition, glinting dully. Clothes, bleached skeletal by the relentless sun, hung on lines, dancing in a breeze that wasn't there, making them seem like ghostly figures swaying to an unheard tune. Children's toys were scattered on front lawns, faded plastic soldiers frozen mid-charge in the weeds, dolls with vacant glass eyes staring up at me, their porcelain skin cracked like ancient maps of forgotten pain. It felt less like an abandonment and more like a sudden, collective vanishing act, like the entire population had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned, leaving the stage set for some unseen performance. That was the first red flag, the first chill that sank into my bones and refused to leave, burrowing deep, making my teeth ache with its cold presence. This wasn't just neglect. This was something else entirely, something deliberate, something waiting. I spent hours there, camera in hand, trying to rationalize, trying to find a logical explanation for the sheer, impossible stillness that permeated everything. The silence pressed in, so profound it hummed in my ears, vibrating against my eardrums until I thought my head would burst. Every creak of my boots on dead leaves, every crunch of gravel beneath my weight, every hesitant click of my camera shutter felt like a thunderclap shattering the unnatural quiet. I walked through houses, saw half-eaten meals on tables, cutlery still resting on plates, though the food itself had long since turned to dust and faint stains. Open books lay face down beside beds, spectacles perched on dusty nightstands, frozen in a moment of interrupted leisure. In one, a child's drawing of a stick-figure family was pinned to a refrigerator, a vivid splash of crayon color against the grimy white, chilling in its vibrant normalcy amidst the decay. And always, always, that feeling of being watched, not by a person, not by an animal, but by the very air itself, by the shadows stretching long and distorted from the skeletal trees, by the vacant windows that seemed like empty, judging eyes, following my every move. It was a suffocating, omnipresent awareness, a silent judgment. It was during that first visit, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in sickly shades of orange and bruised purple, that I heard it. A whisper, just a single, drawn-out, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering across cracked pavement right behind me. There was no wind, not a breath of it. The clothes on the lines hung limp, the tree branches unmoving. My blood ran cold, turning to icy slush in my veins. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against my bones. But there was nothing. Just the deepening twilight and the looming silhouettes of empty homes, their blackened windows like voids staring back. I tried to convince myself it was just the rustle of my own clothes, or my imagination playing tricks strained by the eerie atmosphere. But the air grew impossibly colder, specifically around me, as if an unseen presence had drifted past, brushing against my skin, raising goosebumps. That night, I didn't dare stay in Oakhaven. I slept in my car, parked miles away on a desolate stretch of highway, the engine running for warmth, the radio static a desperate comfort. But sleep offered no escape. I dreamt of Oakhaven. I dreamt of the whisper growing louder, turning into a chorus of faint, dry voices like sand rubbing against stone, or ancient parchment crumbling, calling my name. My name, Alex, but drawn out, distorted, stretched, as if 1,000 ancient tongues were trying to pronounce something fundamentally alien, something they struggled to grasp. When I woke up, gasping, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead, my body rigid with terror, the first rule was already forming in the back of my mind, a cold, hard truth that Oakhaven had etched into my psyche with invisible claws. It wasn't just a place. It was aware. It was alive in a way that defied all natural laws. And it didn't like being disturbed. Not by me, not by anyone. I ignored the instinct at first. Foolish. So foolish. Because Oakhaven was just the beginning. A prelude to the true horrors lurking in the folds of this world, waiting for the curious to stumble in, or worse, for the chosen to be drawn into their silent maw. I thought I was exploring abandoned towns, but they were exploring me, and they had their rules. 8 of them. Break one, and you're gone. Vanished. Become part of the silence. And I broke one. This isn't a game. It's a confession. A warning. Please, if you're still watching, if you feel that same pull to the places the world forgot, to the places where time fractured and sanity unravels, listen closely. Because my mistake could be your undoing. It could be the whisper that calls your name, the rule that traps you. And I can't let that happen. Not again. Not to anyone else. The tremor in my hand didn't stop for days after Oakhaven. My sleep was a jagged, nightmare-ridden mess of whispers and impossible stillness. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe. Every silence held the weight of untold, lurking things. I told myself it was fatigue, overactive imagination, the usual spiel I used to dismiss the unsettling. I was an urban explorer, not some superstitious idiot who believed in ghosts. But Oakhaven wasn't usual. It defied logic, hummed with an unseen predatory energy, and left an indelible print on my soul. A dark, cold certainty began to congeal in the pit of my stomach. I had stumbled onto something utterly beyond my understanding, something ancient and malevolent. And yet, the pull remained, stronger even than the terror, like a wound that throbbed, demanding attention, demanding to be lanced. The whispers, which I had tried so hard to dismiss, now felt less like an anomaly and more like a taunt, a direct challenge. There were more towns. I knew it. And despite the gnawing fear, a twisted curiosity, an almost desperate compulsion, gnawed at me. I needed to understand. I needed to know if Oakhaven was an anomaly, a singular horror, or if it was just the first note in a terrifying symphony of forgotten horrors, a pattern I could discern. I needed to learn the rules, had to. Not for exploration anymore, but for sheer survival. And maybe, just maybe, to warn others away from the abyss I had glimpsed. The next one was called Blackwood. I found it nestled within a dense, almost impenetrable forest, far off the main roads, where the air was perpetually cool and damp, thick with the scent of pine needles and decaying leaves, but also an underlying note of something else, something fetid and earthy. The road in was even worse than Oakhaven's, overgrown, nearly reclaimed by the wilderness, just 2 faint ruts in the earth, forcing me to abandon my car almost a mile out and proceed on foot, battling against thorny bushes and grasping vines. The trees here were ancient, their branches gnarled and twisted like arthritic fingers, interlocking overhead, blocking out nearly all the sun, casting the path into a perpetual dim twilight where shadows stretched long and distorted, even at midday. The silence here was different from Oakhaven's, less profound, more expectant. Like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, or someone to arrive. Blackwood was smaller, perhaps a logging community, a handful of structures, but the decay was more aggressive, more violent. Houses leaned precariously, their roofs caving in, windows shattered like vacant eyes, gaping holes into dark interiors. It looked less like natural decay and more like nature was actively trying to reclaim it, pulling the structures back into the earth with a desperate, vengeful force. Unlike Oakhaven's eerie stasis, Blackwood felt like a desperate struggle had happened here, and nature had won, but not without consequence, leaving behind scars and a lingering tension. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, with a smell of wet wood rot and something metallic, like old blood mixed with iron ore, clinging to the back of my throat. I was more cautious this time. I walked slower, my camera held ready, but not used indiscriminately, my senses on high alert. I listened. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the unseen undergrowth made my heart lurch, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I remembered the whisper in Oakhaven. I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, of my own presence, feeling like a raw nerve exposed. It was in Blackwood that I learned the first concrete rule, hammered into my mind with a cold, terrifying precision. I was walking through what might have been the town square, a small clearing dominated by a skeletal, rusting bandstand, its metal peeling like sunburnt skin. The ground was littered with fallen leaves, a thick, damp carpet of autumn decay. As I stepped, my foot shifted a small, strangely shaped stone, a smooth, dark piece of river rock, unusual for this deeply forested, stony terrain. I stooped, curiosity momentarily overriding caution, and picked it up. It fit perfectly in my palm, cool and heavy, strikingly out of place. I considered slipping it into my pocket, a harmless souvenir, a small memento of an unsettling but intriguing discovery. But something stopped me. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the stone, radiating up into my fingers, and then a prickle like static electricity across my skin, raising the hairs on my arm. And then the air around me grew impossibly cold, colder than the damp forest chill, a chilling pocket of unnatural air. I swear I heard a low, guttural sigh, a sound that seemed to come from the very ground beneath my feet, from the deep roots of the forest itself. My blood froze. I dropped the stone. It landed with a dull thud, unsettlingly loud in the profound quiet. I scrambled back, eyes wide, breath catching in my throat, a primal fear seizing me. I walked on, shaken, trying to shake off the strange sensation, rationalizing it as a trick of the mind. A few minutes later, I paused by a crumbling general store, its wooden porch collapsing under its own weight, its single remaining window a black, staring eye. I took a few photos, my hand still slightly trembling. As I turned to leave, I noticed it. My footprints, the ones I had just made, coming up to the store, were clear in the damp earth, distinct patterns in the moss. But as I watched, an inexplicable shiver ran down my spine, tightening my scalp. Another set of footprints appeared beside them, fading into existence from nowhere, mirroring mine exactly, but slightly off, as if a ghostly twin had walked alongside me, perfectly in sync. And then, slowly, impossibly, they began to deepen, to settle into the soil, becoming more defined than my own, while mine, paradoxically, began to fade, as if sponged away. They didn't just vanish. They seemed to be absorbed, leaving only the spectral, deeper impressions of the other walker, as if I had never been there at all, but something else always had. My blood ran colder than the air in that valley. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, a desperate panic seizing me. The message was clear, burned into my mind. Rule 1. never leave a trace that isn't already there. The towns remember, and they will claim your mark, or worse, make it their own, consuming your presence. They don't just observe, they interact, they absorb, they overwrite. They didn't want my physical presence, not really. They wanted my absence. They wanted to consume the evidence that I had ever been there, leaving only their own impossible proof, their own indelible mark. I didn't take that stone. I didn't leave a single piece of litter. I even tried to retrace my steps on the way out, walking backwards when I could, trying to disturb the ground as little as possible, to erase my passage. And when I reached my car, utterly spent, heart still hammering, I scrubbed my boots clean of any mud that might have come from Blackwood soil, terrified of carrying a piece of it with me. The thought of bringing anything from those places, a leaf, a twig, a single mote of dust, became a new, pervasive dread. I thought I understood. I thought that was the core of their eerie logic. But then came Ashbury. Ashbury wasn't found on any modern map. It just appeared. Or rather, a local grizzled gas station attendant with one eye and a missing finger gave me a vague, knowing glance when I asked about ghost towns in the region, a flicker of something ancient and weary in his good eye. He just grunted, pointed a stubby, missing-fingered hand towards a barely visible, overgrown dirt path, nearly swallowed by tall grass and thorny brambles, and muttered, "Only fools go to Ashbury, and fewer come back." His words were a challenge, a warning, and a magnet all at once, pulling me deeper into the unknown. Ashbury was different again. It was a farming community, or had been long ago. The houses were widely spaced, interspersed with skeletal remains of barns and silos, their wooden frames like giant, empty rib cages against the sky. The land itself was strangely barren, choked with dead, brittle weeds that crunched underfoot like old bones, snapping with an unnerving crispness. A pervasive, cloying smell hung in the air, like dried dust, stale paper, and something sickly sweet, almost floral, but with an underlying chemical tang, like antiseptic mixed with decay. It made my nose wrinkle, then burn, a prickle at the back of my throat. There was an oppressive silence here, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe, making my lungs ache. The kind of silence that feels like a scream held for too long, a suffocated cry. I remembered Rule 1. I was meticulously careful. No dropped items, no unnecessary footsteps. I moved through the empty farmhouse, documenting its eerie stillness, the way the light streamed through grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. Calendars on the wall were frozen on decades-old dates, their pages brittle. Children's drawings in fading crayon still taped to a refrigerator, their bright, innocent colors now muted and sad. In the living room, a wooden rocking chair sat by a cold, soot-stained fireplace, perpetually swaying, just slightly, though there was no breeze in the still, stale air of the room. It moved with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm, a ghost of motion. I watched it, mesmerized, my breath fogging in the chill air of the room. A strange, almost melancholic sadness permeated the house, a sense of deep, irreparable loss, of lives suddenly, completely, irrevocably erased. It felt personal, as if the house itself mourned. Then I saw it. On the mantelpiece, above the cold fireplace, a small porcelain bird, intricately painted, its tiny wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. It was pristine, impossibly so, unlike anything else in the house. It gleamed with an unnatural luster, almost pulsing with a faint internal light, drawing my eye. It wasn't a family heirloom. It looked like something a child might have made, perhaps a gift lovingly crafted. It was beautiful and utterly out of place, too perfect for the decay surrounding it. My hand twitched. Just a little bird, harmless, a perfect small memento, a counterpoint to the despair of the house, something to take with me, to prove I'd been there. I hesitated. Rule 1 was about leaving a trace. This was about taking. Different, right? My mind, still rationalizing, tried to find loopholes to justify the impulse. What could a tiny porcelain bird do? I reached out. My fingers brushed its smooth, cool surface, and that same cold dread, the electric prickle I'd felt in Blackwood, returned, intensified tenfold, radiating up my arm, making my teeth chatter. It wasn't just cold, it was wrong, a malevolent chill. The air around the bird seemed to distort, shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt, but cold. A faint, high-pitched keening sound, almost like a child crying, but stretched, inhumanly thin, echoed in the room, seemingly from nowhere and everywhere at once, filling my head. My hand recoiled as if burned, a jolt of raw fear. The rocking chair, which had been gently swaying, suddenly slammed forward, then rocked violently back and forth, creaking in a frenzied, furious rhythm, like an empty cradle being rocked by an invisible, enraged parent, demanding attention, demanding to be heard. I stumbled out of that house, heart pounding like a drum, a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs, the keening sound still echoing in my ears, making my head swim. I scrambled back to my car, not caring about the path now, tripping over roots, just needing to escape the presence I had disturbed. I knew then, with a sickening certainty, I knew. Rule 2, never take anything from them, not a pebble, not a dust mote. What is theirs stays theirs, and they will come for what is lost, relentlessly, savagely. The towns aren't just aware, they are possessive, deeply, savagely possessive. They don't just consume your traces, they pursue their own, and that porcelain bird, it wasn't just an object, it was a tether, a part of Ashbury, and I had almost severed it, almost stolen a piece of its fragmented soul. What would have happened? I don't know, but the image of that rocking chair, rocking violently, that terrible keening sound, it still haunts my nightmares, a sharp, cold jab to my waking hours. It was a warning, a very clear, very visceral warning of what happens when you try to steal from the void, from something that owns its very emptiness. And I knew from that moment that these places weren't just abandoned. They were guarded by something ancient, something that didn't forgive trespasses, not the ones you left, and certainly not the ones you tried to take. Ashbury. God, Ashbury almost broke me. The thought of that porcelain bird still makes my guts clench, a knot of icy fear. It wasn't just fear. It was a profound violation of something sacred, something I hadn't even known existed until I almost defiled it. The towns were alive, fiercely protective of their silence, their history, their very being. After Ashbury, I seriously considered quitting. The nightmares were constant, the shadows in my peripheral vision more defined, writhing just out of sight, the silence of my own apartment, feeling wrong, filled with phantom whispers. But that gnawing curiosity, that desperate need to understand refused to die. It morphed into a kind of twisted obligation. I'd seen too much to turn back, and not enough to fully grasp what I was dealing with. I had to learn the rules, had to. Not for exploration anymore, but for sheer, desperate survival. And maybe, just maybe, to warn others away from the terrifying path I'd stumbled onto. My next destination was Whispering Pines. The name itself should have been a clue. It was rumored to be an old mining town nestled high in the mountains, accessible only by a long, winding dirt track that felt less like a road and more like a scar gouged into the earth, barely wide enough for my tires. The air up there was thin and cold, biting at my exposed skin, carrying with it the perpetual scent of pine and something else, something acrid like burnt metal and damp, moldy stone. The trees were dense, towering, their needles a deep, oppressive green that swallowed the sunlight, creating a suffocating canopy. It felt claustrophobic, despite the vastness of the mountains stretching around me. Whispering Pines was different again. The buildings here weren't just decaying, they were crumbling, as if deliberately torn apart by some unseen violent force. Piles of splintered timber, rusted mining equipment, and shattered windows were everywhere, sharp and dangerous. It wasn't organic decay, it was violent. The silence here was not heavy and thick, but airy, almost echoing like a vast, empty chamber. And then I heard them. They started small, barely audible, just a breath of sound like the wind through the pines, but distinct, separate from the natural world. My name, Alex. Faintly at first, then a little clearer, almost a sigh, carried on the thin mountain air, seeming to drift from the dark mouths of the mine shafts, from the shattered windows of the houses. My heart leapt into my throat, lodging there, choking me. Oakhaven had been a single whisper, an unsettling anomaly. This was a chorus, a multitude of dry, reedy voices, barely more than a murmur, weaving in and out of the rustling pine needles, calling my name. Hi, Lex. Over here. Alex? Lost? We've been waiting for you, Alex. I froze. My mind raced, remembering the terror of Oakhaven, the phantom footsteps in Blackwood, the enraged rocking chair in Ashbury. My instincts screamed at me. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge. Do not break the silence in return. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick and heavy in my mouth. I wanted to call out, to demand to know who was there, to break the awful tension that coiled around me. But I didn't. I clamped my jaw shut, my teeth grinding together so hard my head ached, my temples throbbing. I focused on my breathing, trying to make it shallow, silent, trying to disappear into the oppressive landscape. The voices grew bolder, weaving around me, sometimes directly behind my ear, sometimes seeming to float ahead, leading the way. They seemed to ripple through the very air, vibrating in my teeth, in my bones. Alex, we're waiting. Don't you want to find us? Just a word, Alex. Just a word. They sounded like dry leaves, or sand sifting, or something worse, something that had been dead for a very long time. They were trying to lure me, to draw me in, to make me speak. I could feel it, a magnetic pull, a perverse curiosity battling with pure, unadulterated terror, a battle I couldn't afford to lose. I walked on, slowly, deliberately, trying to appear unaffected, though my insides were screaming, my skin crawling. I moved through the skeletal remains of what might have been the main street, past the gaping maw of a mine shaft entrance, a black void that seemed to suck in the light and emit a deep, silent hum. The whispers followed, dancing around me, never quite touching, never quite ceasing. They never stopped calling my name, but I never acknowledged them. I never turned my head directly towards the source. I never spoke, a single word, not even a breath. I focused on my path, on the crumbling ground, on anything but the impossible voices that surrounded me. And then, as I was nearing the edge of the town, just as the whispers were reaching a crescendo, almost intelligible now, forming twisted, seductive sentences, a new sound cut through the air, a harsh, tearing sound like dry fabric ripping apart violently, and then a guttural, wet, choking noise, a sound of struggle and termination, followed by silence. An abrupt, absolute silence, far more terrifying than the whispers that preceded it. The whispering chorus vanished, extinguished like a flame. And in its place, for a split second, I heard a single, wet thump somewhere in the dense pines nearby, like something heavy and soft had just been dropped or thrown. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. I didn't look. I didn't dare. I just kept walking, faster now, a cold, hard knot of dread tightening in my chest, fueling my escape. I got out of Whispering Pines as quickly as my shaking legs would carry me, not daring to look back, not daring to imagine what might have happened to whatever made that horrific sound, what had been silenced. That's how I learned. Rule 3. Never acknowledge the calls. Do not speak their names, and do not respond when they speak yours. They are lures, and to answer is to bind yourself to them, to give them permission to enter, to claim. Whatever they are, the sounds are not benign. They are hungry. They are the voice of the towns, or something that lives within them, testing your will, trying to find a way in, to invite themselves into your mind, your very being. I was so lucky. That one time, my raw, unthinking fear was stronger than my intellectual curiosity, stronger than the desperate need to break the tension. The next town was a revelation, and arguably the most beautiful, in a haunting, desolate way. It was called Stillwater, and it sat on the shores of a vast, unnaturally calm lake. The water was a dark, murky green, reflecting the perpetually overcast sky, like a sheet of polished obsidian, perfectly flat, disturbingly still. It was a fishing town once, and the skeletal remains of docks jutted out into the placid water like decaying fingers, splintered and rotting. The air here was still and damp, heavy with the scent of stagnant water, wet earth, and a faint, sickly sweet aroma like lilies decaying in a vase, mingled with something metallic and cold. Stillwater was unlike the others because of its pervasive dampness. Moss grew thick on every surface, clinging to crumbling walls and sidewalks like a slimy green skin. Even the interiors of the houses were coated in a fine, slick layer of green algae and mildew, making every step treacherous. The silence here was deep, almost viscous, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a broken pipe or the faint, distant plop of something breaking the lake's surface, a sound that seemed to come from immense depths. I moved carefully, mindful of the slippery surfaces, camera ready, but held low, my senses strained. The stillness of the lake was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, drawing my gaze. It stretched out, dark and perfectly flat, a mirror to the bruised sky, reflecting every subtle shift in light. As I walked along what would have been the main boardwalk, now a treacherous path of rotting wood, groaning under my weight, I found myself drawn to the water's edge. It was so perfectly still, so reflective, that it was like looking into a dark, liquid eye, an ancient, unblinking gaze. I knelt down, captivated, my own reflection staring back at me, distorted slightly by the ripples of my own breath. And that's when I saw it. Not my reflection, or not just my reflection. Beneath my own face, shimmering like a mirage in the dark water, was another face. It was indistinct, watery, as if seen through tears or a film, but unmistakably human, and it was looking up at me, its eyes wide and unfocused, its mouth agape in a silent scream, bubbles seemingly rising from its lips, though there was no sound. It was a face of pure terror, of drowning, of something utterly lost, trapped beneath the surface. It was gone in an instant, a flicker, a trick of the light, but the image seared itself into my mind, a chilling after-image. I gasped, scrambling back, nearly falling into the murky, inviting water, my hands scraping against the rotting wood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against bone, a desperate warning. I stood there, trembling, staring at the water, which was now perfectly calm again, reflecting only the oppressive sky. Had I imagined it? My mind screamed yes, but the terror felt too real, too visceral. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it away as a trick of tired eyes. But then, as I watched, a faint ripple spread across the surface of the lake, starting from the exact spot where I had seen the face. And then, another and another. Each ripple carried a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a deep sigh from the water itself, a collective breath of sorrow. I spun around, desperate to escape the lake's gaze, its knowing, liquid eye. I found myself walking through the town, but every puddle, every reflective surface, a shard of glass in a broken window, the polished surface of an old wooden table inside a house, even a drop of dew on a rusted car hood, seemed to subtly warp, to show me glimpses of things that weren't there, faces distorted and despairing, limbs flailing beneath the surface of the reflection, and always, always, the sense of something pulling, beckoning from within the mirror worlds, calling to something deep and terrified inside me. I avoided them all, my eyes fixed on the crumbling ground, on anything that wasn't shiny, anything that wouldn't show me another distorted horror. I didn't dare look into the main lake again, not for a second. Stillwater taught me. Rule 4. Never trust the reflections. What you see in them is not real, but it can become real if you let it lure you, if you give it your attention. Do not look too long and never reach into the depths of their mirrored worlds. The towns aren't just empty, they are illusions, traps. They use what's familiar to twist it, to draw you in, to make you question your own sanity. Those faces, those drowning limbs, they were the lost. The ones who had fallen for the lure. The ones who had looked too long or reached too far, inviting something in. And I wasn't going to join them. Not yet. The cumulative dread of these places, the slow, chilling realization of their predatory nature, was becoming a heavy cloak, suffocating me, but also sharpening my instincts, honing my terror into a strange form of survival. I was learning, I was adapting, but the cost was my sanity, piece by agonizing piece, chipped away with every new revelation. After Stillwater, after the terror of those mirrored faces, a perverse kind of clarity set in. I wasn't just exploring ruins anymore. I was navigating a minefield, learning the intricate, terrifying logic of these places. I believed I was getting smarter, faster. I was surviving, stringing together a fragile existence in the liminal spaces. And with each narrow escape, a dangerous arrogance began to bloom in my chest, a false sense of mastery over the inexplicable. I was still terrified, yes, every nerve jangling, but beneath it, a sliver of confidence, of defiance. I was learning their game. I was going to beat them somehow, survive them. I found more towns, so many more, each one a unique flavor of desolation and terror. Some were silent, some screamed with unseen voices. Some were cold, with a perpetual winter chill clinging to them. Some cloyingly warm, like a fever dream. Each one chipped away a little more at my soul, eroded my sense of reality, but also hammered in another piece of the terrifying puzzle, another unwritten, vital law. I learned them through instinct, through near misses, through the sickening certainty that came from the pit of my stomach when I almost crossed a line, when a sudden cold spot or a faint, impossible sound screamed danger. I learned Rule 5, never bring life into their stillness. There was a town called Stonehaven, a crumbling settlement nestled in a dry, cracked basin where the wind carried only the sound of grinding dust. I almost brought my dog, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix, with me once. He loved car rides, usually whining with excitement. But as we neared Stonehaven, his whining turned into a terrified whimper, his fur bristling, his eyes wide with an ancient, primal fear I'd never seen in him. He clawed at the passenger door, shivering violently, emitting a low, guttural growl I didn't even know he was capable of. The moment I felt his pure, unadulterated terror, I slammed on the brakes, turning the car around without a second thought, his whimpers slowly subsiding as we drove away. They despise the vibrant pulse of life. They crave only the echo of what was, the silent, still memory of what died there. His fear was a sharper warning than any I'd received myself. I learned Rule 6, never stay after sundown. In a place called Silent Grove, deep in the Appalachians, I once lost track of time. The sun dipped below the peaks with terrifying speed, plunging the forest into immediate darkness. The way the shadows lengthened, stretching like grasping fingers from the trees, the way the silence deepened, becoming an impenetrable physical wall that pressed in on my ears. It wasn't just the light fading. It was the veil thinning, the boundary between worlds dissolving. The air grew colder, heavier, charged with something other, something that felt like a breath held right behind my neck. I heard movement in the undergrowth that wasn't animal, a dragging, scraping sound that seemed to circle me. They hunt in the twilight, and they claim in the absolute, lightless dark. I learned to be out by dusk, always, to escape before the last shard of light vanished, before the darkness truly began to move. I learned. Rule 7. Never seek their secrets directly. In a forgotten desert outpost called Dry Gulch, I found a small, perfectly preserved wooden box in the remnants of a sheriff's office, locked with an intricate brass clasp. The wood felt impossibly old, yet smooth, and a faint, sweet smell, like dried roses and old paper, emanated from it. Every instinct screamed at me to pry it open, to find what ancient secret it held. But then a distinct, brittle snap echoed from within the box, like a bone breaking, and the sweet smell suddenly turned foul, like rotten meat. The brass clasp seemed to visibly contract, tightening, as if it was clenching down on something. They want their past to remain undisturbed, sacred, their secrets guarded by more than just locks. To pry is to invoke their wrath. It's not knowledge they offer, but a trap. Curiosity in these places is a death sentence, luring you into a deeper kind of horror than you can imagine. And then I found Cedar Creek. Cedar Creek was different from all the others. It was a mining town too, but instead of the harsh, rugged decay of whispering pines. Cedar Creek was soft. Everything was covered in a fine, pervasive layer of white dust, like powdered bone, like a permanent blanket of ash. The buildings were still standing, perfectly preserved beneath this strange, chalky coating, their structures eerily intact. It looked like a ghost town that had been frozen in time, then gently dusted with the ashes of its own demise, a delicate, chilling tableau. The air was dry, almost painful to breathe, scratching at my lungs, and it carried a faint, sweet smell, like old wood smoke mixed with something vaguely floral, and underneath it, a chillingly familiar scent, that of decay, but meticulously preserved, almost distilled. I walked through the general store, past rows of dusty, chalk-white cans on shelves, their labels faded but legible, like ghosts of forgotten brands. I walked through the schoolhouse where tiny, chalk-dusted desks stood in neat rows, and children's drawings, bleached and brittle, still hung on the walls, depicting crude, happy faces now smiling from a forgotten eternity. And in the center of town, nestled in a small, chalk-dusted park, was a playground, a swing set, a slide, a merry-go-round, all coated in the same white powder, impossibly clean, impossibly still. It was eerie, profoundly sad, a monument to lost innocence. As I approached the swing set, a faint breeze, the first I'd felt in days in any of these towns, stirred the air, kicking up a few motes of fine, white dust. And then, one of the swings, a child's small wooden swing with rusted chains, began to sway slowly, gently, back and forth, as if someone had just stepped off it, the momentum still lingering. My gut clenched. I knew the rules. No acknowledgement, no touching. I kept my distance, my hands trembling as I raised my camera, trying to maintain my composure. But as I watched, the swing seemed to gain momentum, swaying with a gentle, rhythmic creak, back and forth, building slowly, as if an invisible child was truly pushing it higher. And in my mind's eye, with terrifying clarity, I saw a child laughing, their small legs kicking, their face full of pure, unadulterated joy, an echo of what was, rendered so vividly it felt real. And that's when I broke. Rule 8. Never feel pity for what you see. Never let your humanity touch their desolation. Never empathize with the echoes, with the memories, because the towns, or whatever resides within them, are waiting for that crack in your composure, that moment of vulnerability, that emotional connection. They feed on it. They crave it. They lure it out of you. I stood there, watching that swing, the ghostly image of the child still vivid in my mind, and a profound, agonizing sorrow washed over me, a wave of grief that wasn't my own. I imagined the child, the life, the laughter stolen, cut short, frozen in that impossible dust. It was so senseless, so tragic, a universal pain. My heart ached, a deep, unbearable throb, and for just a moment, a fleeting, fatal moment, I let my guard down. I let my empathy override my terror. I felt true, unfiltered pity for the lost souls of Cedar Creek. I even muttered under my breath a soft, heartbroken whisper, "Oh, you poor thing." The world twisted, not just visually, but sensually, completely. The white dust around me began to swirl, not in a breeze, but as if drawn by an invisible vacuum, spiraling upwards, coalescing into indistinct, swirling forms. The air grew impossibly cold, then searing hot, shifting with sickening rapidity. The faint, sweet scent became overpoweringly cloying, sickeningly sweet, like 1,000 decaying bouquets jammed against my nose, suffocating me. The shadows elongated and writhed, not just from the setting sun, but from something else, something deeper, coming from within the dust itself, from behind my eyes. The hum, that faint, almost imperceptible hum I'd heard since entering Cedar Creek, now swelled into a deafening, skull-splitting roar, a cacophony of white noise and pressure that vibrated through my very bones. It was the sound of 1,000 voices, not whispering, not calling, but screaming in agony and triumph simultaneously. I felt something reach for me, not a physical hand, but a sensation, an invisible, crushing weight settling on my shoulders, then my head, pressing down, pushing in, trying to force itself into my mind, my body. It felt like something was trying to enter me, to possess the empty space my pity had opened, to colonize my very consciousness. My legs gave out beneath me. I fell to my knees, gasping, choking on the dust, on the screams, on the overpowering sweetness that filled my lungs, making my throat burn. I clawed at my face, at my temples, trying to push away the invisible pressure, trying to stop the intrusion, to fight off what was taking hold. My vision blurred, tears streaming, mixing with the white dust, forming muddy tracks on my cheeks. I don't know how long it lasted, seconds, minutes, an eternity that stretched into an agonizing forever. All I know is that something shifted inside me. Something took root. When the overwhelming pressure finally receded, when the screaming faded to a distant echo, when the dust settled, coating everything in its pristine white, I was changed. I was still me, but I was also not. There was a cold, alien presence nestled deep within my consciousness, a constant, chilling awareness that had taken purchase, an unwanted passenger. I was no longer just Alex. I was also a vessel, a host, a carrier for something I couldn't comprehend, something I had invited in through a moment of weakness. That was my mistake, my fatal, unforgivable mistake. I felt pity, and they saw me, truly saw me, and they took a piece of me, in payment, in colonization. I made it out of Cedar Creek, but I didn't escape. Not really. Every night, I dream of the white dust, of the silent swinging swing, and the laughing, weeping child. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is quiet, I feel the cold, internal tremor, a faint, almost imperceptible itch deep beneath my skin, a foreign vibration in my very core. They are still here, inside me, and I am bound. So, why am I telling you this? Because if you felt that pull, that siren song of the forgotten places, of the places where silence reigns and shadows twist, you need to understand these aren't just ruins. They are living, predatory entities. They have rules, and you break them at your peril. I thought I was strong enough, smart enough, careful enough. My hubris cost me everything. Don't make my mistake. Don't go looking for them. And if, by some twisted fate, you find yourself stumbling into one, if the whispers begin, if the reflections call, remember these rules, all 8 of them. Memorize them. Engrave them on your soul, for they are the only shield you will have. Rule 1, never leave a trace. Rule 2, never take anything from them. Rule 3, never acknowledge the calls. Rule 4, never trust the reflections. Rule 5, never bring life into their stillness. Rule 6, never stay after sundown. Rule 7, never seek their secrets directly. Rule 8, never feel pity for what you see. These are not just suggestions. They are the difference between living and becoming a part of the silence, a part of them. I'm putting this out there, this warning, as my only act of defiance left. Maybe, if enough people hear it, if enough people understand, then my sacrifice, my condition won't be for nothing. It won't be in vain. If you've had experiences like this, or even if this story just resonated with that unsettling feeling of forgotten places, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Maybe together we can try to understand, or at least warn each other, create a network of awareness against the encroaching dread. And for those of you who have supported this channel, who have been with me through my earlier, more naive explorations, thank you. You kept me going, gave me a reason to share. I hope this warning is enough. I truly do.